So Kerry, Rebecca, welcome to the Market Mentors podcast.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here. So before we get stuck into this one, I'd love to know what your relationship is with B2B fintech marketing.
Yeah, so we've worked in it. I've worked in it for a decade, and Kerry, although she looks younger than me, has worked in the fintech industry before fintech was even a word. So Kerry's worked in financial services for over 20 years, and we've worked as B2B marketers in that sector.
I was thinking back to kind of like 20 years ago when I started out at Experian, and like no one even used the word fintech back then. It was just like the big banks, and there wasn't really much competition. But things have like massively changed, haven't they? Even in like the last 3 years, the competition's gone crazy, and I think that whole trust factor has really come to the fore as well.
Yeah, because Experian are a big employer still, are they? I mean, they used to be. I used to work with Experian in London. They've obviously different areas of their business, but they were always a pretty big employer back then.
Huge.
And they had a London base, and I guess you guys were based up in Nottingham, were you?
Yeah, Nottingham originally, and then I did a global role and travelled to London regularly as well.
Good stuff. And how long have you been going at Roo Eve then?
Just over 2 years. It was the best thing we ever did.
Awesome. So we're here to discuss a framework that you created in conjunction with Nottingham Trent University. But before we dig into that framework, what led you to produce this framework in the first place?
So I think there's a lot of buzz, noise, and talk around demand generation at the moment, but no one's really kind of like defined how content marketing sits within that. And there, as far as we've found, like there doesn't appear to be like an actual framework for content marketing within the context of demand generation. And it's something that we have sort of specialised in as an agency. So then when we were approached by Nottingham Trent University, we thought actually this would be a really great project for them to support us with. So that's kind of like where it sort of all came from. I don't know if you want to add to that at all, Rebecca.
No, I think the main thing is for fintechs, content marketing is a massive thing. There's like a big opportunity with that. And I think that's why we've generated a model that talks specifically about content marketing in the context of demand gen, because as Kerry mentioned earlier, there's a big lack of trust, and you just need to stand out in the market where there's tons of other people playing. So that's where content marketing really helps.
Yeah, because I think a lot of companies talk about demand, don't they? But they don't actually talk about, like you said, you need the content to go into the demand gen engine, really. So, and actually creating content is a whole nother chapter in itself of B2B marketing. So, and why do you think using the right sort of content is particularly important for fintechs right now? I mean, you just touched on it there a little bit, Rebecca, in terms of the sort of how sort of saturated these markets are generally. But why do you think that's the case right now then?
So there's a few different things. I think there's the trust element is standing out, and then the audience is quite technical. So you need to really understand the audience and the pain points, and be able to understand at that high level what the challenges are and how to fix it. And I think that's where you can't be using your AI writing tools and cheating and things like that. You really need to pull out the expertise out of the fintech organisation to be able to offer solutions to problems with like free tips and guidance. It's basically about adding value and being able to help solve a problem. And I think that's what will differentiate the successful fintechs from the others, because a lot of them are just pushing sales messages, and they're missing a massive opportunity to appeal to the broader, bigger audience. Because with the model that we'll talk about a bit more, but there's basically 90% of your audience isn't ready to buy yet, and a lot of fintechs are targeting 10% that are ready. And the challenge is those guys are price sensitive, and they're literally comparing competitors then. So by that point, you've missed a trick. I think that's where the content marketing comes in, and it talks to everybody, and then you can like nurture them down the sales funnel. And I think that's what a lot of the fintechs are missing at the minute.
Yeah. And do you think that's because fintechs generally, they come from a more traditional marketing background themselves, perhaps. They come from financial services, as an example. So if I think about some of the sectors that we work in Fintech, but then we work in SaaS. You think of SaaS, and SaaS really understand this kind of methodology in a way, because a lot of the time they can be marketing to marketers or general business people, but they tend to understand that a little bit more, maybe compared to fintechs, as an example. Fintechs are still in the mode of, we must talk about our product, we must talk about our solution, we must push it forward, rather than sort of thinking about, okay, what are the problems that we're actually solving, and kind of leading with that. Do you think that's a sort of reason that maybe some fintechs perhaps struggle with the content side of it?
Yeah, and I think it's if you're not from that background and you're not a B2B marketer, like you said, like you wouldn't even think that would be something that you needed to focus on. I think the challenge as well is that the content marketing is not just sort of like this thought leadership bit. It's not just that bit. There's also the product marketing as well. So a lot of the time we have to educate people on the fact that you need both. So you need like this top of funnel stuff that's the awareness sort of level content, sort of like introducing the problem, and then there's also, you need these quick win sort of approaches to be able to then convert people when they are ready. And I think that's the challenge. I think some people are really good at one or the other, but then maybe don't have a strategy to sort of like direct them down there.
Yeah, good stuff. And we're sort of getting into the sort of framework a little bit, but at a top level then, how would you summarize what the framework is? So
first of all, we collaborated with master's marketing students from Nottingham Trent University. And essentially the framework aims to meet the needs of today's self-service buyer, because they want all the information upfront, available with a frictionless experience, so that they can like take themselves through that journey without having to then go to a salesperson to kind of get it. So we split the funnel by capture demand and create demand. So with creating demand, that's like the biggest pot. So that's essentially like 90% of the audience. And then within that, you've got 60% approximately are not ready to buy. They are not problem aware even. And then you've got 30% of that market are starting to seek change. They're becoming more problem aware, but not quite enough for them to kind of go for it and actually want to buy something at that point. So there's a lot of different stages of the funnel, and it's about being able to take someone from being basically having no even real understanding that there is a problem that they're facing right now, to being problem aware, solution aware, and ready to buy. And that's kind of the journey that we take people through. And it kind of looks a bit like a funnel. I mean, I'll share a link of it so you can share that with your audience. But we tried to sort of steer away from that a little bit, because we know that obviously the buyer's journey isn't linear. You know, you do jump around a bit. So you might be right, you're not solution aware or you're not problem aware. But then maybe you see a thought leader talking about something, you think, oh, actually, that really changes the status quo for me. That might be a problem. Let me have a look at what they're talking about. And then you might start to become a little bit more solution aware, but then maybe you're not quite ready to buy yet. So then you jump back into the demand generation category. You need more education. So then you might see something again in 2 months' time or a month's time that then slowly kind of starts to educate you and makes that problem bigger in your mind, so that then you actually really think, actually, I need to take note of this and I need to start researching solutions. So it's about being able to create content in such a way that it aligns to where buyers are in their journey, and understanding that they will loop and go around from those different phases as well.
Yeah, I like it. And, if you think about fintech, it's like a lot of technical markets, isn't it? Sometimes people don't know that there's actually a solution to the problem. And sometimes they don't even know, like you're saying, there's a problem in the first place, really. So if we're talking to marketers right now that kind of want to implement or use this framework, then what should they, practically speaking, what should they do first?
I think the first thing we always recommend is to start with a strategy, essentially. So we would look to do things like really understand your audience is the first thing. So building out things like personas and ICP data, and really finding out what those pain points are, what their barriers are to why they wouldn't, seek a solution. So really getting under the skin of it. And then from that, you do things like SEO keywords, content cluster strategies, distribution planning. There's kind of like a whole lot of strategy piece that you kind of need to do first. And then the second part we kind of do is create the content and align it to the different stages of the buyer journey. And then the third point, which is actually where most people fall down, is execute consistently. Because, sometimes this is a long-term approach. So you can't expect within 2 weeks to suddenly radically change your entire revenue stream. It does take, I would say, between 3 to 6 months to start seeing proper results. And from that point, it only then gets better and better and better. So, and we've seen this play out with our own clients and from previous roles as well. So we have a lot of experience of having seen this work really well when it's consistently done.
You mean to say we won't get a ton of leads within the first week? Well, I think a lot of founders and CEOs struggle to get their head around this, don't they? That they expect this sort of thing to be like a tap. You can chuck it in like a piece of code, and a piece of software does something. Marketing doesn't quite work like that, does it?
No.
It definitely does take a bit of time. And you talk right about the sort of consistency and obviously the distribution side of things. So, and you talk in the framework about the two different types of content strategies that almost interlink then. What's different about the content that you should create for each one then?
So when we talk about it, we kind of say, well, it's not, you wouldn't necessarily have say a podcast is in generate demand and a infographic is in capture demand. It's about how you create that piece of content and whether it aligns, So for example, you could do a podcast which is really bottom of the funnel, and then it's going to be more of a capture demand piece of content. So it's less about the media and more about how it's designed. So it's about which pain point it aligns to, where in the funnel stage it aligns to, and how you're going to distribute it as well. Because we think about not only how it's going to be found through SEO, but we try and write things in such a way that it could also be used as guest blogging. It could also be disseminated into, say, 10 social media posts, or a webinar, for example. So it's about trying to think about each piece of content really strategically.
Yeah, I mean, repurposing stuff is so crucial these days. You put a lot of effort and time into a particular piece of content, so you want to try and maximize the value of it. I mean, you talked about some of the different types of content then. So would you say that there are certain types of content that sit in each bucket then, or can it be spread across both areas?
Yeah, it is everything. It's a mix. So you could have a blog, like Kerry said, that's top of the funnel, that's very advisory sort of introduction to the topic, but then you could have a piece that's very sales product led. But what we tend to do is recommend, like you said, repurposing it, because a lot of companies tend to put something on their website, which is great for SEO, it's amazing, but then there's no backlink into that to encourage more people to read it. So then it's a massive wasted opportunity in ROI. So it takes effort to write that piece and write that piece well so that it's adding value to quite a technical audience. So I think that it's less about the type of media, it's more about disseminating further, and certain channels will work better for that. So for example, a blog works well on a website, but then you need to create it as a flip book to then promote it on LinkedIn, but then you can backlink to that text format. So it's just being a bit more clever.
Good stuff. And any sort of practical ideas of some of the stuff that you've created for some of your clients?
Yeah, so we've got one client that is a fintech, and they've got a set thing each month that gets ticked off. So X many blogs, X many social posts, that kind of thing. So it's kind of like hygiene factors to keep the consistency going and keep it ranking in Google, that kind of thing. But then also on top of that, there's things like newsletters and guest blogging. So it's all about making sure that they're always front of mind. And that approach within 2 years has taken them from speaking to like tiny utility companies that you probably wouldn't have heard of, to like the top 4 banks. Like they've actively gone out to them and said, can you help us? And they've got such a bespoke, very niche offering that it's just mad that people now know that that service exists and they can save loads of money by using it.
The power of content, the power of B2B marketing,
Yeah.
the power of you guys. So what this sounds great in terms of the sort of strategy and thinking about it going through. But I guess it sort of harps back to, okay, it's all good and well doing this sort of stuff, but you want it to make an impact. I mean, how do you sort of measure the success of something like this then?
Yeah, so KPIs comes up a lot with our clients, and quite rightly so, because spending a bit of money, you want to get a return from it. So I think the first thing we always advise is that demand gen content is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So I know we've talked about that briefly already, but you would expect to get quite a consistent pipeline build after 3 to 6 months. But then at the same time, there's these other approaches you can take to make short-term wins, so you can actually get leads coming in. So as an example, you want to use your content to create a lead nurturing email campaign, and then literally you can measure the KPIs as leads coming in. So what we tend to do is split KPIs by the sales funnel stages. So like you'll have things like at the top end will be your engagement levels, your website traffic, that kind of thing. And then at the bottom, you're looking at things like cost per lead,
MQLs, SQLs, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Those are still alive and kicking, I think, in B2B marketing. Okay, so you're talking like vanity stuff almost at the top in terms of, okay, are we actually reaching people? Yeah. What's the awareness of the stuff that we're actually posting out there? And then sort of drilling it down into sort of the sort of harder core metrics. Some would argue the metrics that kind of matter. So yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I was just going to say, I think the key thing is, I think there's tons of writers out there. Like you can write your own content, it would be really good. But I think the key thing is making sure that it sort of like drives you towards that demand point. And I think that's where a lot of companies are lacking. It's like there's just sort of things that you put in, like certain call to actions, a certain flow of the text, just certain like clever things to make it just pop more and actually generate revenue.
And you touched on a good point. You're thinking about content in terms of, podcasts and blogs and all this sort of stuff, but actually you can use the assets that you create in terms of outbound stuff. So like you said, create an email series to agitate a problem or, talk about not necessarily a solution, I guess, but to talk about a problem more so. You could use the content that you produced in a classic sort of outbound sales sequence, which a lot of people don't necessarily think about when they're thinking about content. But like you said, it's an easy one to generate, or an easier one to sort of generate a bit of demand straight away. And things like a newsletter, I guess, if you've had people that have downloaded stuff in the past through your database or HubSpot or something like that, you could create it in a newsletter to people that perhaps haven't decided to purchase yet, which might get some quicker wins.
I think that point you just made about sales is massive. Because people, they don't like to feel sold to. I think when a salesperson then goes in with more of a, not a softly approach, but an advisory sort of level with this content marketing, it makes a massive difference because people want to listen to you if you're trying to solve their problem. Whereas if you're just like, buy my stuff, they're like, go away. So yeah, that's massive, that piece.
It's one of my favourite books, actually, The Trusted Advisor. So I think it's in the shelf behind me, but yeah, it's a good read. It's a good read. So what about gating stuff? I mean, we hear a lot about putting this, you spend a lot of money on a good piece of content. Should you stick it behind a form, or should you just let people download it straight from the website?
We've been asked about this quite a bit, and I know there's a lot of buzz online, isn't there? I think fundamentally, if you've got something really high value adding, like a piece of research you spent 10 grand on, nobody else can find these stats anywhere. It's really juicy. People really want it. It's worth them putting the contact details in to get it. And then gate it. But anything else, whether it's blogs, that kind of thing, like do the complete opposite. Like if you gate that, you're missing things like SEO because the bots can't crawl it. And like Kerry says, like people can just go to a competitor's website and find that information. So it's worse for you if you gate it. But gating, it's not like a big taboo, but it's just like, think about it. Would you be willing to share your information to get that? Is it worth doing?
And then just to add to that as well, it's sometimes it's not necessarily about the gating of the content, but what companies do with that data afterwards. Because we have seen time and time again is that one like white paper download will go straight to sales. They'll phone them up straight away, trying to convert them, but they haven't gone through that whole funnel of trying to actually generate demand with them. So it just falls flat. You burnt your list, you turn them off, and you're back to square one. And so that practice is something we were doing like 2014, I would say. And actually, perhaps it was working back then. There was a lot less competition and you just had to create a big brand and people would buy from you. But that does not work anymore. It really annoys people. So I think it's, about the practice and what you do with the data afterwards. For example, going back to that lead nurture scenario, putting that into like a lead nurture or a newsletter program we have seen that generate amazing results. We're talking millions in revenue from that approach. So it's just about, again, being very strategic about what you do with each piece of content.
Yeah, always be wary with the form that has a phone number on there. Never fill out a form that has a phone number. You're bound to get a call. So final question then. What would you say are the two big opportunities right now for marketers in the B2B fintech space?
So not many fintechs are doing it. So not many are doing content marketing to generate demand. So there's a huge opportunity to look very different and not be like, we do automation, AI, because it kind of looks a bit samey. So you can actually add value and help people. So that's the first thing. If they do content marketing for that reason, then that would help. And then also in terms of quick wins, it's that distribution piece. So when you started doing content, don't just stick it on the website. Make sure that you're doing things like lead nurturing campaigns so that you're getting those quick wins, because you've got ROIs and KPIs and you've got people breathing down your neck because they need money back for this marketing budget that you're spending. So I think that's the second thing. Make sure that you're building a long-term sustainable pipeline with the right content and having a proper strategy in place, but then also doing the quick wins pieces so that you're actually generating revenue now.
Good stuff.
That's what I would say.
Good stuff. Excellent. Well, look, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I will put a link in wherever you're watching this or listening to this to the framework that you can go and have a look. I'd highly recommend doing it. Some fantastic information in there. So thank you very much, Kerry and Rebecca, for sharing your knowledge and giving up your time to be here today. It's been fantastic to talk to you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.